My brothers, good evening, and welcome to a special Masonic Talk presented by Craftsman Online and the 4th Manhattan Masonic District Square Club. Craftsman Online is a New York State initiative by brothers for brothers connecting brethren with leadership development, Masonic education, and celebrating the history of New York Freemasonry and the special men who have served and continue to serve our gentle craft. The experiences, comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are those of individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, appointed body, appendant body, or Masonic authority. My name is Marshal Michael Larocco. I will be serving as the digital producer for this evening's presentation. We will begin this program in 60 seconds. Tonight's presentation will be recorded and uploaded to our website, craftsmanonline.com. for playback. Please join us on December 3rd for our Lodge and Building Management 101 series with Right Worshipful Michael Siegel, Esquire, who will present on Masonic building and property tax issues, as well as Walter Kliswitz on 501 C2s. And December 17th for author and worshipful brother Ron Safried as he discusses his book, Images of America, Long Island Freemasonry. Visit us at craftsmanonline.com. Like us on Facebook and check out our Instagram email. And email us if you'd like to get involved. Regarding questions for the past Grand Marshals, some brothers have already submitted questions. Should you want to direct your question to the past Grand Marshals, type it in and we'll make every effort possible to ask it. So now we turn our attention to Grand Chaplain, Right Worshipful James Jeffers. Give me a moment to unmute him. Pardon me, Steve, I don't see the Grand Chaplain to say the prayer. Is he on with us? You're on the Jim. Okay. Is he? Right Worshipful?
Good evening, my brothers. I'm privileged to bring the invocation. Great Architect of the universe, we give you thanks for the opportunity to again come together as a Masonic family. As we spend time this evening learning more about our beloved craft, may we look back fondly at the foundational traditions that brought us to where we are. May those traditions also serve for us as a launching pad into the future, where we are able to realize our ideal of becoming more perfect Masons. To the glory of your holy name. Amen.
Brothers, join me and please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of our country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. My brothers, help me welcome our Grand Treasurer, Right Worshipful Brother Steven Adam Rubin. Brother Steven.
Craftsman Online are partnering with the 4th Manhattan District Square Club. Could this Square Club with their lectures, sponsorship of library lectures, and so much more. My Ed Sanders, President of the 4th Manhattan District Square Club.
Great drive and the great gas. Yeah, and we'll do the tap water, bottled water. The Wi-Fi you said here? Yes. All right, you're all set.
I don't hear anything right now. This is John Krupp.
You can always come back to him.
Okay, there's our audio. Now it's gone again.
In our temples, at
Pardon me,
least
Steve, your audio is going in and out. I apologize. I have to take off your headset. If you announce the next person, we didn't hear it. Who's supposed to be speaking now?
I'm going to speak now. My brothers, as the pandemic looks to close our lodges and our temples, at least in the near term, for those seeking Masonic light and brotherhood, I and the Brothers of Craftsmen Online will continue to provide that hopefully which you seek. I hope you will take the time to visit our website, craftsmanonline.com, and visit our programs. In fact, you've already heard about a speaker that will be coming in December. This is Brother Ron Seafried. Brother Ron wrote a book, Long Island Freemasons, and researched all the history of lodges on Long Island. We're starting to do a presentation where we will go around the state and highlighting history of lodges and of our communities. There are countless wonderful Zoom lectures around the state these days in particular. They range from buildings and lodges, esoterica and Masonic history, yet few, if any, take the opportunity to simply ask senior members of the craft for their remembrances and insights, to simply listen to the lessons learned by those who have come before us. We are honored to have such a distinguished panel of brothers tonight, men and Masons who have served their lodges, districts, and our Grand Lodge and our craft for decades. My brothers, during my years of service to our Grand Lodge, I have had the honor of working with 7 Grand Marshals. As our current Grand Marshal is still on the job, he will have to wait until next year, but to be present for this event. But this evening, I'm pleased to welcome 4 of the Grand Marshals who I had the honor of working with in their capacity as Grand Marshal. And I value their knowledge and their friendship as I do all the panelists. I would be remiss if I did not mention 2 Grand Marshals who I worked with who have since gone to that house not made with hands, Right Marshal Robert Finley and Right Marshal Kurt Ott, 2 brothers who lived and breathed Masonry, who made us better for having known them. I would also like to acknowledge Right Marshal George Emmons, who was recently diagnosed with cancer. But we are so pleased that you, Right Marshal Brother George, are able to join us this evening, as it would not be the same without you. We all pray for your speedy recovery. So as we begin, let me say that I'm breaking protocol. On a night where we talk about protocol, I'm going to break some protocol just a bit, because we have 2 past Grand Masters on our panel. But as this is a program on past Grand Marshals, I wanted to begin with the Dean of Past Grand Marshals, Right Worshipful Brother John Fuller, who served Most Worshipful Calvin Bond as Grand Marshal from 1984 to 1986. And I will thereafter introduce everyone in descending order. Brother Fuller, in addition to serving as Grand Marshal, was Senior Grand Warden from 1992 to 1994, Trustee Emeritus of the Masonic Hall and Home, and a Director of the Masonic Medical Research Laboratory. And he's a 33rd degree Scottish Rite Master Mason. We also are pleased to have with us this evening Most Worshipful Vincent LeBone, who is Grand Marshal to Most Worshipful Stuart C. McLeod from 1998 to 2000. Grandmaster LeBone served as Grandmaster from 2012 to 2014, and I was honored to serve him as Proctor during those years. He's further served as District Deputy Grand Master of his district, Grand Treasurer from 2004 to 2006, and Grand Secretary from 2012 to 2014. Next, we have Grand Master Edward Trojan, who served as Grand Marshal to Most Worshipful Carl J. Smith from 2000 to 2002. Most Worshipful Brother Ed further served as Grand Master in 2004 to 2006, Grand High Priest. He was the Grand High Priest of the Grand Chapter in 1993, Grand Commander, Knights Templar from 1987 to 1988, 33rd, everything else. I think right where the Most Worshipful Brother Ed has accomplished. Right Worshipful Bruce Renner served as Grand Marshal to Most Worshipful Edward R. Trojan, 2004 to 2006. Brother Bruce was raised a Master Mason in 1970 in the Lodge of Ancient Landmarks, now Ancient Landmarks Lodge, serving as Master in 1984 and later as Treasurer for more than a decade. He was Senior Grand Warden, and I was honored to serve with Right Worshipful Brother Bruce in 2008 to 2010. He also is a past Grand High Priest, 33rd, and everything else, and he was certainly, can't forget that he was elected a trustee of the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Library Museum, later serving as its president from 2012 to 2018, and is now an emeritus member. Right Worshipful Brother Robert Servideo, Grand Marshal to Most Worshipful Vincent LeBone, 2010 to 2012. Right Worshipful Brother Bob is a past District Deputy Grand Master of the Queens Masonic District. He has been on a whole host of various committees. He's just a wonderful brother. And I also was proud to serve with him during his term as Grand Marshal. Next is Right Worshipful Brother John Krupp, who served as Grand Marshal to Most Worshipful James E. Sullivan, 2012 to 2014. Right Worshipful Brother John joined Masonry in 1978, served as Worship Master 4 times as AGL, District Deputy Grand Master from 2006 to 2008. And he's just a wonderful, wonderful brother. And I was also so honored to have served with Brother John during his term as Grand Marshal. And last, and certainly, I should say not last, because we have actually Brother Jim Kinzel. Right Worshipful Brother George Emmons, Grand Marshal to Most Worshipful William J. Thomas, 2014 to 2016. Worship Master of Garden City Lodge and Smithtown Lodge, Suffolk Masonic District, District Deputy Grand Master of Suffolk, 2004 to 2005, Chairman of the Restorations Committee, 2014 to the present, and Grand Treasurer of Cryptic Masons, State of New York, 2016 to the present. And once again, we are so pleased and honored to have Brother George with us. And I was also so honored to have served with him. I was Proctor and then Judge Advocate under Grandmaster Thomas, and it was my pleasure and honor to serve with Brother George as well. Right Worshipful Brother James Kinzel, the youngster in the bunch. But this is a very impressive bunch, isn't it? Grand Marshal to Most Worshipful Jeffrey M. Williamson, 2016 to 2018, Master of Buffalo Lodge, Master of Buffalo Lakeland Lodge, Grand Rep to Bolivia, Secretary of Western Star Lodge from 2018 to the present, and Chairman of the Committee on Charters from 2018 to the present, as well as President of the Masonic Corporal Association of Erie County. All distinguished men and Masons, and we're so honored to have them all with us tonight. Let me just start asking Right Worshipful Brother John, for those brothers who weren't yet born, what was Masonry like in the 1980s?
Well, it was what I view as Masonry ought to be. And certainly was governed by the conduct of the Grand Masters. And by the way, good evening to Grandmaster Trojan, LeBeau, and I see that Grandmaster Sullivan is among us as well. And greetings to all my fellow Grand Marshals. I think the tone was set, as always and is today, by the Grand Masters. And in my case, I served as, you have related, the most worshipful Calvin G. Bond, who was extraordinary individual, a gentleman 100% of the time, one who was very understanding and a very kind individual and forthright. And I think that he set the perfect example for what a Mason ought to be. Thank you.
Right Worship, I'm going to move around a little bit. Right Worship Brother Bruce, what was it like to serve as Grand Marshal for a Grand Master who, in fact, was a past Grand Marshal himself?
I'm just fooling around with the controls here. Can you hear me all right?
I can.
Well, I think it's an advantage because Grandmaster Trojan actually knew the game of being Grand Marshal, and it is an interesting position, so that a lot of Grand Marshals come into it without really having much of a background for it. But I was lucky that he knew what he wanted as a Grand Marshal, and he knew that I could do that because we had worked together during Carl Smith's term. I was a Grand Deacon and he was a Grand Marshal, so we had worked together for a long time. So it was to me it was advantageous, and you know, Ed and I got to be really good friends. We were I would say friends beforehand. We had spent a lot of time in Grand Chapter together, that kind of thing, but the important thing for a Grand Marshal is to get along with his Grand Master, and sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. But in our case, we were pretty perfectly fitted because we had kind of just worked together for a long time. So yeah, that was my take on that.
Brother Bob Savidio, I'm going to come to you in a minute and ask you the same question. I'd like to ask Most Worshipful Grandmaster Trojan, how did you start your Grand Lodge run? You obviously had a very illustrious career, you know, in various positions of appointed Grand Line positions. How did that come about, Grandmaster Trojan?
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that. I was kind of, when I started in the Grand Lodge line, I was Grand High Priest, actually. I think the same year, or possibly going on to be Grand High Priest. I was in 1993. Sheldon Blank was Grand Master at the time, and he died about a month after I became Grand High Priest, if I remember the story correctly. And as a result of that, from 1993, when I first became, you know, quite closely involved in Grand Lodge, right through to about 2012, Grandmaster LeBone and Bruce and I were, our terms of office were intertwined the entire time. So we had three brothers who had Grand Marshal experience who were available the entire period for, what was that, 15 years more or less, I guess. But I'd like to come back for a minute and tell you a little story. We heard John Fuller tell about what proper people Grand Masters are, and you know, back in his day. I'd like to tell you a little story about something that happened very early in Sheldon Blank's term as Grand Master. His marshal was a brother by the name of Rod Burris. And I knew Rod very well because he and I were in the same class to receive the 33rd degree. So we got to know each other very, very well. And right after Sheldon became Grand Master, as always happens, he had a reception. And Sheldon's reception, as I recall, was in Oswego. I might be wrong on the town, but it was in that part of the state. And like receptions tend to be for Grand Masters, they're very big affairs with hundreds of people there from all over the state. And everybody's out to have a good time and enjoy the evening. Well, I happened to notice, and a few others, as the evening was going on, you know, from early evening towards dinner, but prior to dinner, little by little, the women were disappearing. 2 or 3 would go here, 2 or 3 would go a little later. And what was happening was Rod Burris was taking them into another a banquet type room in the hotel. And what was going on in there was they were having male strippers. So does that really tie in with what John is telling us? No. But what it says is we know how to have a good time, or at least the ladies do. So any event, coming back to Bruce and Vinny and I being very closely associated, I guess I was pretty much the dumb one when it came to protocol and marshal stuff, because I leaned very heavily on Vinny, and Vinny knows that. Bruce, I counted on to keep me on the straight and narrow. Between the 3 of us, we got through about a 15-year period. No one knew it.
Master LeBone, if I may ask you, how did you get involved yourself in the Grand Line and moving up? Obviously, Grand Marshal, I think, was your first Deputy Grand Marshal was your first position in the Grand Line as an appointed position. How did you get involved in the Grand Line, Grand Master LeBone?
Grandmaster, you keep, hold on 1 second. Every time I unmute you, you mute yourself by accident. So give me a second. You should be able to unmute now. We can hear you.
Thank you. Listen there, whoever the moderator is that you are running this whole show, before we go any further, if you're going to control the microphones on everybody that's here, we have a problem. Because Grand Marshals tell you guys what to do. You don't tell us what to do. Am I right, Grand Marshals? Okay. Good evening, everybody. First, I'd like to say, would you repeat that question, Brother Grand Treasurer?
Yes. How did you get involved in the Grand Line? Obviously, you were appointed by a Grand Master, but what was your connection, and how did you ultimately find yourself?
That's a very interesting story. It dates back to 1993, actually. No, I'm sorry, 1994, the year Gary Henningsen became Grand Master from after Blank died. The Stuart McLeod was running for Deputy Grand Master that year, and he was very, very fortunate that he was going to have 3 brothers that were going to be picked for his Grand Marshal, or Deputy Grand Marshal at the time. I come from the 10th Manhattan District, and I had known Stuart McLeod many years when he was Grand Treasurer, when he was Grand Marshal, and he turned around and said, Vinny, I'd like you to become my Deputy Grand Marshal. But unbeknownst to me, I didn't know that Bob Stack was running for Deputy Grand Master also. He called me up and said, Vinny, I'd like you to be my Deputy Grand Marshal. The reason was because I was very involved in a lot of the Manhattan districts with the with protocol and everything of the sort. And I was on a number of other committees in Grand Lodge, very fortunate for me at the time. And it worked out that there was another person who was supposed to be the Grand Marshal, and he wound up having a stroke, and he couldn't serve. So I wound up being the person that Stuart McLeod, who I had known for a long, long time, has been picked to be his Grand Marshal. And I was very, very fortunate to have that happen. And, you know, I had been a district deputy in the 10th Manhattan in those days, 1 year only, 1987. So, and we were very lucky to go on to serve. I don't know if anybody saw, I held up this card a little while ago. If everybody can see where I am, this protocol and precedent, entrance and precedence card. Actually, Grandmaster Trosen and I are the ones that wrote the initial one in 1998. He doesn't tell you the truth. He knows a lot about protocol. He just doesn't like to follow it. That's the difference. And believe it or not, when we served in 1995, he was not the Grand Marshal, he was the senior deacon. There was a brother, God forgive me, I can't remember his name, who served as Grand Marshal for Earl Hino Jr., and he became Grand Master in 1995. Stu became Deputy Grand Master, and we served 3 years. And in those 3 years, both Ed and I and whoever else were in the line served the 2 oldest living teenagers in the world. If you ask me a question later on, I'll give you a story or two about how crazy these 2 Grandmasters were. They were great, but they were a little bit crazy when it came to having fun. So what else would you like to know at this moment?
Well, we'll get back to you, Grandmaster. I want to ask for some dirt from Right Worshipful Brother Bob Savidio. How was it serving Right Worshipful Brother Bob for Grandmaster LeBone? I'm sure you're going to say it was wonderful. Is it true, once a Grand Marshal, always a Grand Marshal, Brother Bob?
Well, first I'd like to say hello to all that are present. Wish them a happy Thanksgiving that's coming. It was a little bit stressful and has advantages and disadvantages to serve a Grand Master that was a Grand Marshal. See, everybody has their own way of doing things. Usually the Grand Marshal has his way and nobody knows anything else, so it's done his way. And when you work for a man that does his job very well and did the Grand Marshal's job very well, well, it kind of puts you on a spot that you have to do your job very well, because he knows if you make a mistake. Most Grandmasters don't really realize the intricacies of what you have to do, but Grandmaster LeBon did, and he was a very particular and man that wanted things done the correct way. If he tells you a story later on, ask him to tell you the story about when we went to Florida and we were on the Sojourners trip down there, and we showed up at this luncheon that we were supposed to have many, many people present. And when we got there maybe a half hour earlier, 40 minutes earlier, and nobody expected us. And this was supposed to have been all planned, but there were no tables, there were no chairs, there was nothing. And we were having a whole bunch of people coming in about a half hour. So sometimes things don't go exactly as everybody would like to do. But we had a lot of fun. And Grandmaster LeBone is a pretty down-to-earth man. And so he understands when somebody makes a mistake, when somebody does a hard time. I tell you, I was very honored to be his Grand Marshal, and I wouldn't trade that in. But the disadvantage as well that he knew what had to be done, and he knew, we had the card. We used to go by that card he was showing you for the people that come in first, and who the proper growth protocol is, and how do you greet them, and what order do they come in. And it was tough because he wrote the card, so he knew what was on the card and he had to stick to it. But it was, yeah, the advantages outweighed the disadvantages 100 to 1. It was really a pleasure, and we had a lot of fun doing a job, and I think we did a pretty good job.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Brother Bob. Right Worshipful Brother John Krupp, for newly raised Masons, or those brothers unfamiliar with Grand Lodge, can you describe briefly what you consider the official role of the Grand Marshal to be?
Well, I think every program or every ceremony that the Grand Master gets invited to or attends needs to be done in a proper way. There's no haphazard way of doing things. There's a right way and there's a wrong way. And I always wanted to make certain that I didn't embarrass the Grand Master or myself. So I always got as much information from the person who was organizing the event whether it be a rededication, whether it be an installation, or whatever it may be, get as much information from him ahead of time as I could possibly get. Spend time on the phone. I didn't care about whether I used a computer or not. I just wanted information. And so when I showed up the night of an event, I had the confidence that I knew who was going to be there, 95% anyway. There was always surprises of people showing up, but I always wanted to know ahead of time as much as possible what I could do so I could have the east set up for chairs, where the ladies were going to sit, the head tables and that for the banquet afterwards. So his responsibility is to all of the nuts and bolts of an evening going on, so that if it's a anniversary or a cornerstone lane or a rededication, that all the people that or they're members of that lodge organization that were hosting it had a good feeling that we did everything, and they had a wonderful evening and not full of hymns and haws or uncertainty. That it was the Grand Marshal's job to make sure that the evening flowed properly and that everybody was recognized. It should be recognized. And those past Grand Masters and other members of Grand Lodge got their proper recognition as they much deserved. So to me, it was the Grand Marshal was responsible for of course, the travel arrangements and hotels and all that kind of thing. But to make sure whatever the event was, how minor it was or how important it was, that it went perfectly.
Thank you, Right Worship Brother John. Right Worship Brother George Emmons, once again, wonderful seeing you tonight. How did you prepare for the office of Grand Marshal?
Hi, good evening, everybody. Wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving upcoming. First of all, I want to thank two people who are on the panel this evening. First, Most Watchful Ed Trozen, who appointed me initially District Deputy of Suffolk District. And I guess it was in that position that I came to the notice of Most Watchful Vincent LeBone, who first appointed me Deputy Grand Standard Bearer. And I served as his deputy and Standard Bearer through the 4-year term that he was Deputy Grand Master and Grand Master. Having been District Deputy in 2004-06, one of my good friends within the Metropolitan District was Most Watchful Bill Thomas. He and I served together, he from the 6th Manhattan District and me from the Suffolk. So we got to be very close, our lives became very close. And about 3/4 of the way through being Standard Bearer, Bill turned to me and said, one time we were together, I think you'd be a good marshal for me. Keep me in line, get things done. So that's pretty much how that happened. Was I prepared for it? Frankly, in both instances, I was knocked right out of my socks. To me, they seemed to come from nowhere. I've always been a servant of the craft, and to me, it was just another opportunity to serve the craft in Grand Lodge. We had a lot of fun throughout all the 8 years that I was a Grand Lodge officer. And as Grand Marshal, there were a number of, and as Standard Bearer, there were a number of opportunities out in the public where we were not just amongst ourselves, but we were out, like a good example would be the sesquicentennial, the Statue of Liberty, and also the Masonic interment of Captain John Paul Jones, or I should say Admiral John Paul Jones down in Annapolis, just to mention two. That's how it happened, and I have a few more stories to tell as the evening progresses. Thank you.
I want to throw a protocol question at you, because we did say that Grand Marshals are in charge of protocol. And I want to make sure that we get some information out, especially for the younger brothers who are listening. When is a district deputy Grand Master outranked by other Grand Lodge officers?
You're asking me. It depends on the Grand Master, but he is outranked in his district by the Grand Master.
And is it correct that only is when it's his official visit, then he is the highest ranked officer in a visiting lodge? But if he's
Saving the Grand Master, yes, that's true.
no, not even a Grand Master, but for example, if another elected officer was present during an official visit, then the district deputy Grand Master is a higher rank, but that's only on his official visit evening.
That's what I believe is still current, yes.
Thank you so much, Right Worshipful Brother George. Right Worshipful Brother Jim, we talk about Masonry, James Kinsel, we talk about Masonry as with mentors and learning from others. Obviously, I didn't introduce everyone as first a deputy Grand Marshal, but everyone served first for 2 years as deputy Grand Marshal. How did you find the mentorship and the learning process that took place when you were a deputy Grand Marshal in order to help train you for the office of Grand Marshal? Right Worshipful Brother Jim Kinsel? Jim Kinsel.
Now I'm on, okay.
Yep.
Wish everybody happy Thanksgiving. And I was pretty lucky. I had plenty of mentors. I had Grandmaster Trozen, Grandmaster Williamson, who had gone through the Grand Line before me, John Krupp, and of course, my biggest mentor was George Emmons. And I learned a tremendous amount working with George for 2 years. So, you know, mentors are important because you go into this job, you think you've got a handle on what's going on until you get there and you say, what did I get myself into?
What did you find was the most challenging thing about being Grand Marshal?
Keeping up with Grandmaster Williamson. He is 120% in everything he does.
What was it like traveling around the state in the van? Describe that for some of the brothers who have not obviously been you know, along for the ride.
What they say, what happens in the van stays in the van.
But talk about some of the experiences just traveling. How did you enjoy traveling and visiting other lodges and meeting other brothers? That must have been a particular joy.
We did a tremendous amount of that because the brothers remember when Grandmaster Williamson was the Deputy Grand Master, we did town halls, and we did a lot of them. And from town halls, we went into rededications. We did a lot of them too. And so we didn't have many free weekends at all. And so we did a lot of traveling. And of course, you get in that fourth year, that trip in the van back and forth to New York City does get tiring. It's a 7 or 8 hour trip. And we did it a lot.
Thank you so much, Right Worshipful Brother Jim. Right Worshipful Brother Bruce, what would you say was one of your most special memories as being a Grand Marshal?
Well, there's just so much. I mean, I kind of involved in Grand Lodge in the kind of the active line for about 10 years. So some of it blurs together. I mean, the times that I was a deacon blurs time with being a marshal. And even when I was a warden, they were all kind of different. Yeah, I mean, as a warden, you're really on your own. I mean, you're just, there's a lot of camaraderie for the when you're in a Grand Master's team, because there's 4 people involved and their wives generally, and so that part of it was a lot of fun. I mean, we traveled a lot together. We saw a lot of different people, different ways of doing Freemasonry across the state. A lot of variations on the theme of Freemasonry within bounds, of course, but. So I have a lot of great memories, mostly revolving around the people, you know, that were involved. And I mean, to pick out a specific story, some things like Ed's story about Ron Burris, some of those stick out in your mind sometimes, but I think that it was a very magical time for me. It was like something that was very harmonious to my to what I guess I needed then, as far as you know, kind of my life. And I found it very rewarding to do that. You know, of course, it was just something, and by the way, it gets a little addictive because after you're a deacon for 4 years and then you're a marshal for 4 years, you get kind of, it's almost like home, you know. It's no longer a job. It's basically a way of life. So it was.
That's Grandmaster Williamson's line.
Yeah. Well, it was difficult in some regards. It's difficult to back out, away from that, but you know, other things come along, and life progresses. But yeah, for me, the time that Betsy and I have spent with Barbara and Ed through the years in all sorts of issues, you know, driving through snowstorms to get to some location. I was also the rain driver, and Ed was the snow driver in the van, and things like that just were, you know, you look back at it now and you just brings a smile to your face. This, when you decided you were going to do this, I started thinking about those days, and they were all very pleasant memories, you know, just very pleasant memories.
Thank you so much, Right Worshipful Brother Bruce. Right Worshipful Brother John Fuller. What was your experience in observing the work of your Grand Master? And can you share a moment of leadership or compassion that you witnessed that was unique to Freemasonry? Right Worshipful Brother John? John Fuller?
Changes, sorry.
You're on, John.
All right. I don't know if you can hear me now?
Yep.
All right. I don't see anything, but I'll keep talking. Most Worshipful Calvin Bond came from the Oswego district, and that's where I'm from. And he was respected by everyone in the district. He had been a senior grand warden years before, and he and his junior grand warden really invented what they had in those days as seminars. And everyone knew of his background, and he was very active in his own lodge as well as across the district. And everybody literally looked up to him. He was about 6'4", I think. So I think to all of us who knew him, he was the what we thought was a perfect image of Freemasonry. And to answer or to reply to Grandmaster Trozen's story about the entertainment that the ladies went to see when Grandmaster Sheldon Blank was having his reception, I was unaware of that. I had no idea. And I think that was done at the Wine Creek in Oswego. You mentioned Rod Burris. Rod Burris is a great storyteller, and I liked Rod a lot. He was a very good person. So in answer to your question, I think that, as I said before, Grandmaster Bond was to all of us here in the district, still is, the image of Freemasonry.
Thank you, brother. Most Worshipful LeBone.
Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
You have served in nearly every single elected and appointed Grand Line position, just about. How would you compare the difference in your responsibilities as Grand Master, Grand Treasurer, Grand Secretary, and Grand Marshal? How did each one of those positions build to the next one?
Okay. Yes, I've been very fortunate. One of the other, well, actually, Grandmaster Thomas, Bill Thomas, that is, at a Grandmaster's meeting a couple of weeks ago, turned around and said, I'm the only person that's ever been invested of the office of treasurer, secretary, deputy grandmaster, and grandmaster on the three sides of the altar. So when you become treasurer, secretary, and then grandmaster, you have to on every different side of the altar. So I was very fortunate. I don't know exactly how to explain what it's really. Well, I was involved for so many years. I was very, very lucky. The person that I served as as deputy grand marshal was, you might call him he was a professional grand marshal, because Leonardi had to use him, or asked him, because Leonardi's marshal passed away in the first year, and Stuart McLeod served as the acting grand marshal for him. And then he became grand marshal for Grandmaster Singer. And he was, he served 4 years there. So he just kept on going. And he was there for a long, long, long time. And it was very, very hard for me to, how would I put it, keep in line, because everything that I would do, he had already done. And one time I did something very wrong. And he says, "Why did you do that? I said, "Well, I'm the Grand Marshal." And he said, "Well, no, yeah, you're the Grand Marshal, but you're not supposed to do that." He says, "Where did you learn that?" I said, "I learned that from you." Because you're the one that taught me, do what you have to do. And I told that to Bob Savidio once or twice too. Do what you have to do. And to John Krupp also, who was Grandmaster Sullivan's marshal. By the way, those two brothers did very well. They took a lot of notes. They did a lot of writing. John Krupp was writing days and days upon pads and pads of what he had to do, but he did a good job also. But it's very interesting when you're in all three phases of being the highest elected officer, in Grand Lodge. You learn things that you would never learn ever before. There was a Grandmaster called Switz. And Grandmaster Switz, when I became the Deputy Grand Marshal up in Utica on St. John's Day, grabbed hold of Stuart McLeod and myself, and he pulled us out to a picnic table underneath the tree right next to the Memorial Building and the Royal Arch of the Knights Templar Building. And he sat down and he said, "Here's what I'm going to tell you two brothers. You have to do exactly what is necessary to keep our Grand Lodge going strong. And you," and he pointed at me and he said, you have to learn to keep your mouth shut when you hear things that nobody else ever hears." And that meant that, yes, you're the Grand Marshal, but you're sworn to secrecy in a way, because there were a lot of things that would go on back in those days. John Fuller could attest to that. He could tell you that the Grand Masters ran Grand Lodge, the past Grand Masters. It's not like it is today, where we're an equal opportunity employer. But that's what it was like. And it was really something really fabulous to be part of.
Thank you so much. Most Worshipful Trojan, what advice would you give to someone who is looking to get involved in the Grand Line? What advice would you give to a younger brother who would aspire one day to be appointed to a Grand Line position, or maybe even run for office?
Let me come back to that in a minute or two. First off, at the risk of becoming the idiot of the night, I think there's another occasion when the district deputy is outranked in his own district. If the Grand Master visits, the staff officer outranks the district deputy because he works for the Grand Master as well. Under those circumstances, the staff officer precedes the district deputy. I'm sure of that, but I'm sure three other guys are sitting here going to disagree with me. And I'd like to throw one or two things out. We heard what stays in the van is what happens there, or whatever the passwords are. When I was Grand Master, to give you an idea, kind of things that go on, we had a harmonica band. Somebody showed up one day with a bag of harmonicas and decided we all need to make music together. There was also an occasion when Bob Finley was voted out of the band, and his wife didn't vote to keep him. So that's just a couple of things that went on. I could go give you 20 others. Now, and I would also like to say something about the most memorable thing that happened to me while I was Grand Marshal, and probably the saddest thing in many ways was I was Grand Marshal for 9/11, and a week or two after 9/11, Grand Lodge had all the wives, the widows of brothers that died in 9/11 into Grand Lodge just to kind of say thank you for what their husbands had done and what they had sacrificed for our country. And this was a very, very sad time for us in many, many ways, because one of the widows was Carl Fitchie's daughter. And during the course of this event, each of them was given an envelope. None of them ever looked in those envelopes, I don't imagine, until they got home. And as I recall, there was something in the neighborhood of $250,000 in those envelopes. So that's something I'll never forget. Now, let's get to your question.
I liked your answer better. Pretty powerful stuff, right?
I could tell you more funny stories, but let's let that go to later on or another day.
Thank you so much, Grandmaster Trojan, for those remarks. Right, Worship Brother Jim Kinsel, question for you, sir. How should a local lodge appropriately coordinate a Grand Line or Grand Officer visit? Right, Worship Brother Jim?
Okay, that's pretty specific, and it's lined up in the 24-inch gauge. And I went through that when Grandmaster Williamson first got in. Everybody's handing them a business card or giving them a note for their pocket, trying to get a date. That is not the proper way to do it. The proper way is fill out the form and send it in to the Grand Marshal or the Deputy Grand Marshal to get the Grand Master or the Deputy Grand Master to an event. That is the proper way to do things. And when it's done the proper way, communication between the Grand Marshal or the Deputy Grand Marshal and the lodge is very, very important, going back and forth, as John Crumpet said. You have to communicate so when you get to the event, you know what's going on. But there's a proper way to do this, and it's use the form or that basis that's in the 24-inch gauge. And then when I was Grand Marshal, I said, you don't have to actually use the form. You can email me with all this information. But don't go around the Grand Marshal or the Deputy Grand Marshal, because they're the ones who coordinate everything.
And I understand that the 24-inch gauge is now online. I don't know exactly what site, but I think it's a wonderful tool that most brothers are really not using. Would you agree with that, Brother Jim?
I agree 100%.
I mean, we keep on writing these new programs, but yet in that book, great men, great brothers drafted letters and programs, and we're just not really following them at times, are we?
We don't follow the programs. Grand Lodge over the years has come out with a tremendous amount of programs, and the lodges don't follow them.
Thank you, Brother Jim. Right, Worship Brother George Edmonds, to you, sir. What would you do differently in your Masonic career if you had a choice, if you had a chance to do it all over again?
What would I do different?
Yeah, if you had a chance to do, different Masonic, something differently in your Masonic career.
Oh, one time when I was master the first time in Garden City, we had an old timer who was rather obstreperous. And we had a continuing discussion in the lodge. I forget the topic. The topic is immaterial. But this older brother had his say, and he had his say, and he had his say. And it was, unfortunately, for me, the only time I ever used my gavel when I was a presiding officer. I should have exercised perseverance and patience instead of summarily standing up for the 7th time to acknowledge his remarks and gaveling him down. Had I not done that, I would have felt a lot better, but the man was trying not only my own patience, but the patience of the brothers on the sidelines and the other officers within the lodge. So at the time, I felt fully justified in doing it. But in retrospect, that is one thing that I do regret happening. One thing I really got a kick out of being able to do, when I was master that first time, I observed Right Worshipful Harold E. Turner, who was Grand Marshal to Most Worshipful William E. Punt. One evening, take a look at what was proceeding and say to those assembled, all brethren below the rank of Right Worshipful will enter the lodge now. Well, that created rather a conundrum outside the lodge. Needless to say, the Tyler was not quite prepared to admit all these brothers not having, taken the grip and word from each of them. So there was a long queue to get them all in. And once they were all in, Harold, I happened to be right by the door inside. He turned to the Grand Master and said, Grand Master, we are now ready to proceed. I remembered that because he did it not once, but twice in the Nassau district, 2nd Nassau district back then. Well, years later, that same circumstance obtained at a lodge in mid-state, and there were more Right Worshipful brothers than there were brothers. And they were all queuing up in their proper stations or ranks according to their printed protocol. And Grandmaster Thomas was becoming rather, what would you say, unsettled because things were not proceeding appropriately. And he says, George, do a Harold. So I stood on a chair in the anteroom and said, all brothers below the rank of Right Worshipful will enter the lodge now. You should have seen them scramble. It was a sight to behold. But in any event, two notable instances in my career, one having been a witness and the other having had to do that. It created a little bit of a stir, and I took a little bit of flack from some of the purple in those districts where where those events occurred. But they understood. And when it was explained that the Grand Master was ready to leave, if they didn't, they were much more forgiving of my peremptory summoning of them all into the lodge.
Thank you so much, Brother George. Right Worshipful Brother John Krupp. Right Worshipful Brother Jason Sheridan has a question, and I want to pose it to you. Approximately how many miles per year would you estimate that a Grand Marshal is traveling in that van? Brother John Krupp?
I've forgotten how many miles we put on it. Our Grand Lodge, we went through 2 sets of wheel bearings. As our team seemed to go everywhere, Grandmaster Sullivan received a lot of invitations, not for many major events, but we also received invitations for breakfasts and different smaller events that he honored their requests as many times as he could. And it wasn't uncommon at all to go from one end of the state to the other without hesitation to accept the invitations that different lodges gave to us. It was a wonderful experience. When you travel around the state as Grand Marshal, you get to see the little small country lodges that have been there for over 100 years, and you get to see the big city lodges as well. And one thing that I noticed, that Masons are the same everywhere, whether they come from a little hick town or whether they come from the big city. They all love the craft. They love their lodges. They love what they do, and they're proudest Masons. And if they had tail feathers, they'd strut around like peacocks, showing that they were proud to be a Mason. We did put a lot of miles on the Grand Lodge van. the wheel bearing story. We were on our way to Cohocton for a Amaranth installation, I think it was, and we were within 25 minutes maybe of getting there when we hear all kinds of clanking and screeching and squealing in the front end of the van, and we called Bob Butler back at Utica. I said, what do you think we should do? We should push on or just sit here by the side of the road? And he said, well, can you still steer? Can you still brake? And we said, yeah. He said, well, go on and do your meeting. We'll see what it's like after you get out. Well, we went, did the meeting, got back on the highway, and everything seemed fine for the first 5 minutes. And then it started squeaking and groaning and clanking again. So Bob Ruggles, who was driving at the time, says, I'm not driving this any further than I have to. So the very first rest stop we got to, we pulled in there, and Bob came and got us from Utica with another van, and we stayed overnight at Utica. So that was a memorable time. We also got snowbound in Binghamton. We pulled in at night into a motel because the driving became so difficult that we stayed overnight, and we had to park in the back of the motel because all the ones that were up front were already taken. And we woke up the next morning, it was nothing but a sea of white with just the top of the van sticking out of the thing. And we spent half the day waiting for a plow to come in to plow the lot out. And we finally got out with the help of a brother Mason from the district that came and plowed us out. But I can't remember the exact number of miles, Steve, but it was a lot.
I think every Grand Marshal can probably attest to the thousands of miles that are really traveled across the state, many different ways, back and forth, side to side. Brother John, I have another question for you. For many brothers visiting New York City during Grand Lodge session, it's a highlight of their Masonic year. What did you look forward to during our annual meeting? Did you specifically forward to?
Getting my shoes shine. What I looked forward to was the camaraderie of the brothers. Experienced it, it sent chills up and down my spine. What you are is when you're standing in that Grand Lodge room singing the national anthem. I look forward to also, and one of the proud moments I had is the very first time that he introduced Right Worshipful Brother Jim Sullivan as Grand Master, and walked down that center aisle of Grand Lodge with him on my arm, walking down there and introduced him. That was one of the proudest moments in my life. I always look forward to hearing the reports of all of the committees, even though we didn't always hear the complete report. But I always found interesting what the different committees and other bodies had to say that went on in Grand Lodge. I learned an awful lot about how Grand Lodge functioned, and I'm sure that the individual master of each lodge learned a lot when they were there to see, hearing the different reports and speakers, got to know a little bit more how Grand Lodge worked. I'm sure everybody that's ever gone to a Grand Lodge session has come back awestruck and enlightened as to how things work.
Thank you, Brother John. I must say that I got a particular thrill a number of years after Grandmaster Sullivan and you brothers were done with your term of office, and seeing you year after year at the Grand Secretary's golf outing. And I remember one year, Grandmaster Sullivan and the entire Grand Line, yourself and the other two brothers that you traveled in the van with, were all able to travel together to the Grand Secretary's golf outing. And I remember I snapped that picture, and that's one I still prize to this day.
Yeah, I remember that particular day, and I'm still a terrible golfer. I went the first time because I thought it was expected of me to be there but I thoroughly enjoyed every one of the golf tournaments, even though my golfing has improved probably one bit. But I always enjoy the fellowship and the brotherhood of those days.
Thank you, my brother. Brother John Fuller, right? What's your brother John Fuller? We know that service to the craft continues years after our terms of office are completed. What continues to bring joy in your Masonic career? Brother John?
I can see you.
Good
All
to
right.
hear you.
Now I see myself. Well, I think continue on in the respective bodies. Blue Lodge, I take great joy in hearing the ritual given as it is written. When I joined Lodge a long time ago, I was fortunate because everyone in Lodge seemed to be a good ritualist, and they saw to it that we new ones held to that tradition. Also being active, I had more time to spend in the Royal Arch and the York Rite and Scottish Rite, and just trying to assist those whenever needed to become good Freemasons. I want to pay a tribute to one of my mentors, the mentor as the Grand Marshal. When I came on, Grandmaster Leonardi was the Grand Master, and as Grandmaster LeBone has alluded to, his Grand Marshal died within the first year of being Grand Marshal. His name was, I don't remember his first name, but he was known as Buddy Houck, and he was a buddy. And he taught me well. He had a black book. I never found any telephone numbers in there, but it was all about what a Grand Marshal should do and how to do it. And for some reason or other at St. John's Day that year, I took a great many notes. I'm not sure if I took as many as John Krupp, but maybe a close second. Buddy Houck died in early spring. And as Grandmaster LeBone alluded to, the Right Worshipful Stu McLeod came on as assistant. And but before Grand Lodge came along, Grandmaster Bond called me and said that Grandmaster Leonardi wanted me to be the Marshal in Grand Lodge. And so a lot of practice went before. We went down early and took care of that. And then we did I was asked to do the Grand Marshal work at St. John's Day. Fortunately, I'd taken a lot of notes there because as any Grand Marshal knows, getting the district deputies and the staff officers in their proper places and their line and getting them into the chapel is a major accomplishment. You hope you accomplishment. I think every Grand Marshal has uttered the phrase to the deputies and staff, if you're handed the incorrect commission, keep moving. We'll give you the proper commission after it's all over. So it was a great time. I know I've wandered away from your direct question, but I think that every Grand Marshal enjoys the work. He's active and has something to do every time, all the time. Thank you.
Grandmaster LeBone, would you tell us, Grandmaster, your most special experience during your many years of traveling around our great state and visiting lodges? Tell us one special moment that you recall occurring.
Well, I don't understand that question. What are you trying to ask?
Would you just tell us some of your wonderful experiences in traveling around our great state?
Well, there were so many great experiences as a Grand Marshal. Or do you want to know as a Grand Master? Which do you want to know?
Grand Marshal.
Grand Marshal. Okay. As a Grand Marshal, I was very fortunate to go all over the world with as I alluded to earlier, the two oldest living teenagers in the world. I was in Russia. I was in Spain. I was in Italy. I was in Hawaii. Brother Trosen was there with me in Hawaii, if I remember correctly. And, you know, we were all over. And the special moments were being able to travel to all these places and meeting Grand Masters and officers from other countries, and also traveling to our conventions and meeting Grand Masters and other officers from states. It sticks with you, it stays with you, and it teaches you that you are not the only person in the world that has gone this way before. And it was the best time of my life to be traveling all around. But of course, the most wonderful time was being first installed as an appointed Deputy Grand Marshal in 1995. That's the very beginning of being a Grand Marshal.
Grand Marshal LeBone, what was it about your service that made you decide to run for Grand Master or Deputy Grand Master after your service as Grand Marshal?
Well, I served as Grand Marshal from, like I said, from 95 to 2000. And I didn't run for Grand Treasurer until 2004. And that's when I became the Grand Treasurer. And then that was for 2 years. And then I took a 2-year hiatus. And because there was another Grand Master that came on to the scene in between. And in 2008, I decided that, well, I've been Grand Treasurer, and, you know, let me just sidetrack for a second. You know, being a Grand Marshal, you're not the most well-liked person in the world. You know, it turns out that when you tell everybody, as somebody else said earlier, I think it was George Emmons that said it, that everybody below the rank of Grand Master, please go inside the room. Well, that ruffles people's feathers, especially if you're, you know, in a district where you have a lot of guys that think they're already Grand Masters and all they are is a past district deputy, you know that makes a big deal. But that's the way it was. I decided that I was going to run, and hopefully I would be able to get support. And I have to tell you something, without the brothers from the very West, although I did gather a lot of votes from the downstate, from the metropolitan area, not downstate or upstate. But the brothers from the western part of the state helped me a very, very lot, because well, we were all part of a team. And that was Ed Trosen and Carl Smith and everybody that went before me. And that's how I was able to get enough votes to become Grand Master.
Thank you, Grand Master. Grand Master Trojan, what is it with ties and Grand Masters? Any anecdotes about ties?
Oh, let me tell you another one first. I tell you a Vinnie LeBone story. And Vinnie's going to remember this very well, because, this would have to been about probably 2000, I would think, Vinnie, very, very closely. We were in Savannah, and Vinnie and I was Deputy Grand Marshal, I guess, and Vinnie was Grand Marshal. I forget exactly how that fell together. And we're sitting on a bench. This was in February, I think, or January, one of the other, for the Grand Masters Conference. And the Grand Master of Italy comes walking down the sidewalk, and he didn't speak English, but he always came to New York for our Grand Lodge. Every year he came to our Grand Lodge. And I'm sitting there, and Vinnie says, "Don't worry," he says, "when he comes," he says, "I'll interpret for you." And the Grandmaster comes up and Vinny says, my mom and my papa, they come over on the bigger boat. So that Vinny will remember that very well and probably try to change it. Now, ties, yes. As everybody knows, Grandmasters have ties. Well, I go back to a day back in the Henningsen era when that didn't happen, but forever since then, I think every year there's been a coat and a tie kind of combination that the officers have all worn, and somewhere along the line it switched to include the deputies and staffs and everybody, so everybody looked alike. When I went in as Grand Master at Grand Lodge on the day of the installation, my guys all got together because we had voted, and the ugliest tie we'd ever had was the one that Carl Fitchie had when he was Grand Master, and it was purple and black with a little something else in it. And after we were leaving Grand Lodge, we were going down to get in the van to go over to the hotel to get ready for dinner. Everybody took their tie off, and they went and they tied those ties to the fence around the parking lot at Grand Lodge. To my knowledge, they're all still there.
You know, it's now 8:15. We're getting, you know, beyond the hour, and I don't want to impose upon our panelists and everyone else, but I do want to just have the opportunity for every person, brother on the panel, to give some thoughts, an anecdote, and brothers, if they're able to stay on, wonderful. If not, you know, this will be recorded. So if we can just start maybe right now with Right Worship Brother John Fuller. Brother John, thoughts, remembrances, reflections, something to impart to other brothers. This is your opportunity. What would you like to say to everyone?
I'll give you two as quickly as I can.
Take your time.
One of the highlights would be the Statue of Liberty on August 5, 1984, when we gathered there to memorialize the laying of the cornerstone of the pedestal. It rained that day, just as it had done a couple years, 100 years before. Everyone was soaked. But that was a very memorable occasion. The other one that's a little humorous, Grandmaster Bond was invited to LaGuardia Lodge to receive the LaGuardia Medal. And the Grandmaster of Italy was there as well. And he allegedly did not speak English either. When it came time for the presentation to Grandmaster Bond of the medal, Dominic Ruffalo was in the Grand East. And as I recall, that we were on the Isle of Staten, Richmond district. In any event, as some of you who remember Dominic, he was about 5 foot tall. Grandmaster Bond was about 6'4". They placed Grandmaster Bond west of the altar, about 6 feet away from it. And Dominic Ruffalo came down out of the east. When he was about halfway down, the junior warden got up, walked over to the altar with a stool in hand, returned to his chair, just as Dominic arrived on the scene and stood up on the stool and presented the medal. I wondered just how they were going to handle that, but that's the way it worked out, and it was sort of a humorous night as well as a serious night. LaGuardia Lodge, of course, named after the mayor of New York City. So a lot of good memories on my behalf, as all the Grand Marshals have. It's a great experience. It's one, I think that Bruce Renner mentioned that the wardens are on their own, but the marshals are where the action is. Thank you. It's been a nice night. Hello to everybody and all the Grand Masters, and a happy Thanksgiving to each and every one, and hope you're well and healthy. And George Emmons, you certainly are in our prayers every day.
I'm gonna work down the list of the Grand Marshals we have this evening. Most Worshipful Grand Master LeBone, the floor is yours. Parting thoughts, parting remarks, anecdotes, funny, sad, humorous. It's all yours.
Well, first of all, I'd be misspoken if I didn't say happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Please stay safe and hope that we get past this terrible, terrible virus that plagues the whole United States and the rest of the world. There isn't too much that a person could say when they have been so lucky to serve in every capacity in a Grand Lodge. I can tell you that the brothers that I have served with in every office that I did hold and still hold as a past Grand Master, you know, we're not able to say in easy words what it does mean to us. You know, Masonry, there's a brother named Right Worshipful Joe Correquio. When he became Grand Treasurer, we handed him the apron. He got his apron, was presented to him, and we turned around and told him, Joe, don't go to sleep with it tonight. Well, he says, I am already going to plan to go to sleep with it. That's how much it means to me. We gave up our lives with our children, with our brothers and sisters and parents to serve this Grand Lodge. Every person who has been a Grand Marshal gave up, in my case, and in Ed Trosen's case, 5 years each of being in line as appointed Grand Line officer. And well, it shows. It shows that you have to turn around and hope that your family will still love you after you have make your wife a Masonic widow and your children become orphans. So there were many things that we had to do to make amends for that. And you want to know something? I'm still paying for it. So it's not something you get over quick. And John Full is laughing. I'm sure the judge has a number of things that he told him, right? Judge Cathy must have told him a number of things. Straighten up or fly right or get out. But yes, anybody who wishes to aspire to become an appointed Grand Line officer, such as the Grand Marshal, Standard Bearer, Deacon, okay, you just keep in your mind that you have to give up an awful lot. When George Emmons said to me, Grandmaster LeBone, I'm going to be Bill Thomas's Grand Marshal. And I said, well, are you sure you want to do that? I said, because, and George will tell you that, you have to give up a minimum of 4 years of your life. And then remember, just like I tell Savidio all the time, where is he? He's up in the corner. I tell Savidio all the time, you're my Grand Marshal for life. And you are still Bill Thomas's Grand Marshal for life, Grand Marshal for life. Ed Trosen, you and Carl Smith, and there, you know, we're a team in many ways. Many of us are so very, very lucky. And I see faces here that I haven't seen in many, many years on this call that we're on. And one of them is a brother named Jerry Walter, sitting in the corner over here. How you doing? I think I haven't seen you in, I guess it's 15 years. So, but anyway, thank you for having this conversation with the Grand Marshals. I didn't think we were going to be this lucky to have this many people show up to hear us give a boring dissertation to all of you. But we're very happy that you did, and I hope that we do it again sometime. And Grandmaster Sullivan was sitting there in the corner, relaxing and listening, and you should ask him if he wants to say something, because he's the only other Grandmaster online right now that hasn't said anything.
I think that's a great idea. Grandmaster Sullivan, Jim Sullivan, would you like to say some words? We'd love to hear from you, sir.
Right Worshipful Rubin, I want to thank you for hosting this, putting it all together. You know, the other two Grand Masters that are here are awesome individuals. They love this fraternity, as we all do. Vinny worked with me as my Grand Secretary. Without him, I would have had a difficult time as the Grand Master. Most Worshipful Trojan is probably, I don't know if he knows it, the best mentor I've had in Freemasonry. All of the Grand Marshals that are here are wonderful men, deserve all the accolades that they have received this evening. And I want to say thank you to all of them for their past work. And I know they're still working for our Grand Lodge. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much, Grandmaster. Pleasure seeing you. Love to Gail. Most Worshipful Trojan, final thoughts, remembrances, anecdotes, touching, happy, sad.
I've got one more I'll share with you. But first, I just want to say it's great to have been part of this Grand Marshal show here this evening. We all are very good friends, but two of my very best friends in the entire world, Vinny and Bruce, I'm glad to have you be able to share this together, because we have been together for so many years, and I hope we continue to stay together for many years to come. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little story. This is true, and I'll leave you with this. Back a number of years ago, Grandmaster Fitchie, Grandmaster Smith, and I were made members at sight of the Tall Cedars of Lebanon. I don't know if it's the only time I ever went was the one night. And I don't know if the ceremony was meant to be kind of amusing or whether it was a really serious thing, because I never saw it a second time. But the women were there, and it got really, really kind of out of hand with people snickering and going on. And I don't know, many of you I know Renee Fitchie. Well, she wasn't there that evening, but Carl was. And the Tall Cedars of Lebanon, the shrine and the grotto have their fezzes. Well, the Tall Cedars of Lebanon have a triangular hat that kind of comes to a point. And Carl Fitchie went home that night and says, "Renee, wait till you see what I got tonight." And he went upstairs, took off all his clothes,
Oh my God.
and just had that hat on and came downstairs. Well, anybody that knows Renee knows what happened after that.
Are there any pictures that we can
we've
see?
never forgotten that. So I would like to thank you all for this opportunity. Wish you all a great holiday season. I know that it's going to be a tough time this year with the seriousness of the epidemic that we're all facing. I know we're going to get through it together. We've got this far together, and we're going to continue to get through it together. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you when the epidemic is over and the weather gets nice. Thanks a lot again, Steve, for hosting this, and good night.
Thank you, Grandmaster. Right Worship Brother Bruce Renner, this is your opportunity to say some parting shots at Most Worshipful Trojan, your Grandmaster.
Well, both Vinny and Ed had some good things to say. First of all, I'd like to say that I was happy to see everybody. I think we all ought to get together when the pandemic is better and kind of sit around a round table with a bottle each and play Truth or Dare, you know. So here's the bottom line for me in all this was I've had a lot of jobs in Freemasonry. Some of them I was very good at. Some of them I was not. Some of them that I took on, I thought I would be very good at and was not. And some of the ones that came to me that I was not too wild about actually turned out very well. So it's been kind of a bumpy ride, you know, for me anyway. But Grand Marshal was a great job for me. And anyone who aspires to be Grand Marshal, I think should keep two things in mind. First of all, you really, really, really gotta like the guy who is Grand Master. And you gotta have a relationship where you can be fairly honest with one another about things. And that doesn't always happen, by the way. And I've seen less successful teams at least in my estimation, have a problem with that. The other thing is you really have to like the work. I love being Grand Marshal. Vinny Lamone loved being Grand Marshal. I think Ed loved being Grand Marshal. There's a lot of people, I think everybody on the call to some extent loved being Grand Master, but it is a job at the end of the day. It's not an honorary thing. It's not, your ticket to being something in Grand Lodge. Maybe you'll go on and do other things, maybe not. But it is a job, and it's a job that is different for every team. Like for instance, Ed always picked his own schedule dates. He kept his own calendar. My job was, once he picked those dates, to make them work out right. And Ed said to me very early on, he said, I'm not going to do your job. He said, that's what you're here for. And there's a truth to that. The Grand Marshal can make the Grand Master's term bearable in many ways. And it's a difficult job, as those who've been Grand Master on the call know. But the Grand Marshal can make it a lot easier or a lot harder depending on their disposition. So pick the right guy, and pick the guy who wants to do the job. And if you're the guy who's asked, do you like this guy, and are you willing to do the work? So that's what I'll leave you with.
Thank you so much, Right Worship Brother Bruce, for your kind and thoughtful words. Right Worship Brother Robert Savidio, Bob Savidio, I apologize, I've not called upon you. There were so many panelists, and I didn't always get to you and all the other panelists. But please take your time. Love to hear your remarks. I love serving with you when you were Grand Marshal. What people don't know is that Right Worship Brother Bob Savidio, it was a very, very high police officer, chief, captain, I'm not sure exactly. I think he's got a call to go to arrest someone in the police department, and yet he always had a smile on his face and a joke and a kind word, and he got the job done, but with love and kindness, and that is what I will always remember, Right Worship Brother Bob, and I love you to death, as I love all these wonderful men who are on the panel tonight. Brother Bob, the floor is yours. Take your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all those kind remarks. I do appreciate that. Really, what I have to say was already said by so many others and so much more eloquently. But as a past Grand Marshal, which I enjoy, I think that sometimes we have to remember that protocol and etiquette, well, we have a lot of pomp and ceremony in our craft, and we should. We pay honor and respect for those that's been in it a long time, that lead the craft, and that make us what we are. And we do follow the Grand Masters. And that's what we have to understand, that this is only, even the protocol, a part of it is to get things done properly and to get to the brethren. But what we forget sometimes is that proper protocol is the Grand Master. What he says is proper protocol. Now, I've been to so many places where maybe we've changed protocol a little bit, and people say, "Oh no, that's not right." Of course it's right. If the Grand Master says it's right, it's right. That's what protocol is. But all Masonry is not just protocol; it's a whole way of life. I don't want to get philosophical. I really don't. But what we are is more than just etiquette and protocol. That's only a sign of respect, and it helps us get the job done and done properly, and not to hurt people's feelings if we can. Like Grandmaster LeBone said, being a Grand Marshal sometimes doesn't make you the best friend of the people that you're putting down. But you're not putting them down. You're doing what is best for that Grand Master and to get that job done correctly for that time, whether it be a rededication or what it is. But Masonry, I mean, I've seen people get so angry because they thought they were being disrespected. But that's not the whole thing in Masonry, the respect. And I mean, we've all held all kinds of positions. I was a district deputy, a grand representative, chairman of all kinds of committees in the district. I was on Grand Lodge committees, and the main purpose was to get things done. And you have to follow rules and regulations. But it's a matter of also being among your brethren. I remember one time, I won't take up too much time, but I remember how shocked people were. And we went to Grandmaster Thomas's lodge. This was upstate. I don't even remember what it was for. But it was such a hot day. I mean, just roasting. And we all had tuxedos on and everything else. And we're talking there, and Grandmaster LeBone says, you know what? I think we'd be a lot more comfortable. Let's take our jackets off. Well, we took our jackets off, and we're all over there with our suspenders on and everything else. And that was no disrespect shown to anybody. And when we got downstairs, he said, oh, wow, I didn't think he would do something like that because, I mean, he's one of the guys. Well, of course he is. He's a Mason. And that's what all Grandmasters are, Masons. But they have a job to do, and the Grand Marshal's job is to make sure that it's done and done properly. As far as being Grand Marshal for life, Vinny, I'd be proud and honored to be your Grand Master the rest of our lives. And this was one of the it's such a big thing in my life that I was a Grand Marshal, and now being a past Grand Marshal. I, again, would like to mimic everybody's words and wish everyone a good holiday, a happy holiday, be safe, take care, and God bless us. And I love tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you, Right Worshipful.
Right Worshipful Brother John Krupp, the floor is yours. What would you like to say to everyone, to impart to the youngest brother listening, as well as to the oldest brother? Brother John?
Yeah, here I am. I would be remiss if I don't recognize a few people that were instrumental in my years as Grand Marshal. First of all, I have to thank Right Worshipful Jim Sullivan for considering me to be his marshal. I was just finishing up my 4th term as master of my lodge when he was Grand Lecturer, and I offered to drive along with him as he traveled around the state, because I was interested in seeing the different lodges and that, what have you. And evidently he saw something in me that gave him cause to ask me to be his Grand Marshal. And I loved every minute of it. And I hated the day I had to step down when my term was over. I want to thank Bob Servideo and Dennis Feldman, who were the senior members of the Grand Line, who were our mentors as us junior guys who were first coming in. I followed them around like puppy dogs, so trying to glean as much as I could, and they were welcoming me with open arms. Sometimes those two teams don't get along very well, but we got along perfectly. Some of the memories that I have of that were fairly unique. Right Worshipful Paul Wrights, I'm sure all of you know who he was. At the time, we were, I think it was 2012, he was one of the main contractors involved in rebuilding the Freedom Tower in New York City. And he took us on a tour of that construction site. And we went up in that tower just before the radio tower was replaced at the top of it. And when we got to the very top floor, the only thing that kept you from the ground was a orange chicken wire fence around the edge of it. And you could walk up to the edge and look down and see the Statue of Liberty down there, the island of Manhattan, and it was just an amazing view. After Hurricane Sandy, Grandmaster Sullivan and I went to New Jersey and New York and helped distribute clothing that was donated for the people that were victims of the hurricane. To me, that was quite an emotional time to see young mothers with little kids in tow looking for boots, looking for clothing to wear. Another time was attending Garibaldi Lodge. Of course, you know that's an Italian lodge, and we were invited for their installation of officers. And the whole thing was done in Italian. And I was just awestruck to be there and just felt so privileged to be part of that lodge's installation and to hear the musical wording of the Italian language. It was, and the families that all attended in force, it was just amazing. And a time that Jim Sullivan and I had, we were there on a 4th of July weekend, and we wanted to see the fireworks in the city. So we wound up going to the 19th floor of Grand Lodge, and the only room that we could actually get an unobstructed view because of all of the other tall buildings was a little small storage room with all kinds of junk that was in there, and it only had a small window about the size what you'd have in a bathroom, and we were head to head, you know, craning to see the fireworks out that window. And of course, being part of the rededication of the Statue of Liberty base, standing on the grounds where the general public would not been allowed to get that close, but I got right at the base of the statue and looked straight up, and you could see that arm stretched up to the heavens, and I think I shed a few tears at that time because it was quite an emotional thing. And I'd always wanted to go to the Hall of Fame for baseball, and we got invited by some lodge members from Cooperstown, and we got to go into the museum, and we got to go into a hermetically controlled room where we had to wear gloves and what have you, because we got the opportunity to handle different artifacts. And they asked us, well, what do you want to see? And I says, I want to see Lou Gehrig's bat. So they open up this big metal cabinet, and there's bats galore from famous baseball players. And he handed me Lou Gehrig's bat, and I got to hold it and swing it. It was just amazing. And also pick up his uniform. His uniform was a heavy woolen material. I don't know how they wore that in the heat of summer, but it was Lou Gehrig's uniform. And that was, to me, that was an unbelievable thing. And to go to West Point for a Grandmaster's Day at West Point and watch the CU cadets come out through those arches from the school, to come out onto the parade ground, it was just a very stirring moment. Being Grand Marshal at this point in my life, it just picked me up by my bootstraps. I had been retired for a little over a year, so the vacation part of it was over with, and I found myself, what am I going to do with myself, you know? And being asked to be Grand Marshal was just exactly the thing I needed, because I jumped into that with both feet, and I thoroughly enjoyed what I did. People said, wasn't it a lot of work? And I said, yes, it absolutely was a lot of work. But I got to meet people. I got to go places I never would have gone. I got to see things, do things that if I hadn't had that opportunity, I would still not have had that opportunity. So I thank, and I've made such good friends. Vinny, I can't thank you enough for the number of times that I came to you with some borderline decisions on protocol about introducing people and seating people and things like that. And you didn't treat me like the go away kid, you bother me type of thing. You welcomed me and answered my questions, and you helped me out a lot. So I can't say enough about the people that I met. I got to understand what Grand Lodge was about. I know I don't see everything as Grand Marshal, but I saw and witnessed things. I sort of set up camp at the long table in the Grand Master's conference room right outside the Grand Master's office. And you could hear some of the things going on inside. Sometimes people would come in and complain to the Grand Master. The Grand Master has to discipline people. And you knew you were aware of things going on. And sometimes I was disappointed in Masonry because of some of the wrongdoings that Masons did. But it just made me love the fraternity all the more. And sometimes it breaks my heart to see the way things are. nowadays with lodge attendance being down and what have you. And but anyway, I love being a Mason, and I loved being Grand Marshal, and I thank everyone for your friendship, for your help over the years, and I love you all, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Brother John. Love you too. Right Worshipful Brother George Emmons, please take your time. The floor is yours. Share some final thoughts, reminiscences about Grand Marshal, non-Grand Marshal, just about being a Master Mason. What would you like to say to the youngest brother in this, Zoom room tonight?
Masonry is a way of life. If you understand the basics and practice them in your daily living, your life will be immeasurably enhanced. Maybe not anything you can quantify immediately, but certainly over the years, well worth the time, effort, and the minor inconveniences of attending lodge on a regular basis. Personally, I'd like to say thank you to Steven and Michael for tonight's opportunity to speak about the experiences as a Grand Marshal. I'd like to thank Most Worshipful Ed Trozen for the appointment as District Deputy Grand Master, Most Worshipful Vincent LeBone for the opportunity to serve him in Grand Lodge as Standard Bearer, Grand Standard Bearer, Most Worshipful Jim Sullivan, who appointed me Deputy Grand Marshal, and Most Worshipful Bill Thomas for his friendship and appointment as Grand Marshal. Personally, to thank each and every one of the brothers who may be out there or may see this in future, I thank you for your prayers and for your best wishes in this current health crisis in which I find myself. I want to wish everyone a happy holiday, happy Thanksgiving, happy Christmas, happy Hanukkah, whatever seasonal holiday you observe. May you enjoy it thoroughly and fully. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have served our beloved craft as a Grand Lodge officer, and specifically as Grand Marshal. It's an opportunity that I cherish, and I cannot speak highly enough about the experience. And lastly, my best fraternal regards to one and all. Thank you again.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Brother George, for your thoughtful remarks. Right Worshipful Brother Jim Kinsel, please, the floor is yours. Take your time. What would you like to say to everyone tonight? And those looking upon this recording 100 years from now?
It's been an interesting trip for me. I actually got in the line in Buffalo Lodge back in 1980, and I followed Most Worshipful Williamson all the way through Lodge, Buffalo Lodge, through Royal Arch. And when he asked me to be his Grand Marshal, how could I say no? I've lived with him through the highs and lows. We've cooked dinners together. We've had all kinds of different things. Some of the highlights of me as Grand Marshal, probably one of the major highlights is when we went to the 300th anniversary of the United Grand Lodge of England. Not knowing what we were going to see there, but what an extraordinary program. I couldn't believe what I saw. I'll never forget that in my life. But the biggest thing from being Grand Marshal is my opportunity to go out and meet and make more friends all over the state, all over the world, people I know on a first name basis that I would have never had the opportunity to meet had I not done this job. And for that, I am very, very, very thankful. Something to the brothers, when you got all your blessings, you have to give something back. And you got to keep giving something back to the fraternity, working in the trenches to try to make things better in these changing times. And that's what we all have to do. With that said, Brother George Emmons, my best to you, and our prayers are with you, and our prayers are also with Most Worshipful Ed Gilbert. I talked to his son Matty today, and he's getting stronger in rehab, and hopefully he's going to get out of there pretty soon. With that said, brothers, happy Thanksgiving. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we will see you in the future.
My brothers, I would like to just give the opportunity, before I just make some very, very brief closing remarks, to allow the District Deputy Grand Master of the 4th Manhattan District, Philippe Holy, who's present tonight, just to say a few words. Brother Philippe? Brother Philippe? Well, maybe we won't do that then.
I'm sorry, my mic was also shut on my side as well. Thank you, Right Worshipful Steven Rubin. Most worshipful, Right Worshipful, very worshipful brethren and brethren, good evening. And that's really, thank you for this great opportunity for learning about what a Grand Line Officer would be. And thank you, my brethren, for sharing your experience as Grand Marshal, what it means and imply, and really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for all your continued dedication. We could feel it throughout our meeting. We are looking forward to continue to learn from you. And with that, I wish to you, to everyone, a very, very happy Thanksgiving. And may God bless you and your loved ones. May God bless all the women and men who are serving our great country. And may God bless our great fraternity. My brethren, stay safe and be well.
Thank you, Right Worshipful Brother Philippe. I must apologize, with these Zoom evenings, it's always challenging seeing who's actually present. And someone earlier was kind enough to introduce to let me know that Most Worshipful Jim Sullivan was here, and I want to thank him for being here. I also want to recognize Right Worshipful Brother Scott Pete, Senior Grand Standard Bearer, who is present this evening. Always wonderful to see Right Worshipful Brother Scott, whether it's his name or his face. I want to recognize Right Worshipful Brother George Philippidis, a trustee of the Masonic Hall and Home, as well as past Senior Grand Warden, Right Worshipful Brother Richard Morley, who is also undergoing some health challenges. And so he also remains in our thoughts and prayers. I also want to recognize Right Worshipful Brother Yves Etienne, who's the head of the Commandery of New York. My brothers, when I was first coming up with this notion to put this program together, I received some pushback from some folks because they said, why would you want to do something like that? And I'll be honest with you, I think that we are missing and forgetting the stories of generations of Masons that have come before us, and we're losing those stories. The memories, the experiences that our panelists have experienced, they're not in any book. They have existed in small settings, in small venues, in small lodges, in big lodges around the state of New York and around the world. And I think, and they are part of our Masonic history. And I quite frankly don't want to lose what they have learned along their Masonic journey. So I want to thank them from the bottom of my heart for not only their service, their friendship over the years, but for their opportunity to hear this evening them speak and share their thoughts. I started in the Grand Line, I think it's about 16 years ago. I felt like I was a babe in arms. And the truth is that every one of these panelists have become, I've become very close to them. They are more than Most Worshipfuls and Right Worshipfuls. They are just dear, wonderful brothers that I've learned from and in watching their journey and as I continued my journey. I want to thank them for that. I want to thank them for their thoughts and comments this evening. I want to thank you all, my brothers, for the service and the work that you do for our craft. God bless you all. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, a healthy and happy, Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah, as well as a healthy New Year. We have many other programs in Craftsman Online. Please join our website, craftsmanonline.com. Check it out. So a lot of brothers around the state are joining in to celebrate brotherhood in New York State. I think that there's a voice and need for this. So thank you so much once again. I salute you all. God bless you once again.
Happy Thanksgiving. Good night.
Happy
Good night,
Thanksgiving.
everybody. and have a
Happy
good
Thanksgiving,
holiday.
brothers. Everybody.
And
Be
thank
safe.
you Thank you.
Good
I
night,
just
all.
told them good night.
Nice
God
job,
bless
Steve.
us, everyone.